So today we're going to start our discussion of loops, otherwise known as repetition. What's it called in the textbook? Looping. Okay. In some textbooks, you'll see that chapter titled something like repetition structures or repetition or something like that. Yes. Either that or actually just remember to do it before I start. Okay. So we're going to talk about loops, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to say, here's our paycheck problem that we did last week, I think. We worked on it a little more last week. And by now you're probably hoping that it will just go away. But we're going to come around to it just one last time here. Basically what I want to do is, let's say, we've got a big company, we have, a couple hundred employees, and we don't want to have to keep running this, executing this program over and over again. We would like it if this program just continued to ask us for more students to process until we didn't have any more students to process, so we didn't have to keep executing it over and over again. So I would start that by saying something like, here's some pseudocode. Okay, so pseudocode just means I'm not really writing it in C++ yet. I'm just kind of thinking it out conceptually, and so I'm going to write it in sort of English. So I'm going to say, as long as there are more employees to process, compute one employee's paycheck. Okay, that's what I want to do. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my pseudocode, and then I'm going to start replacing it with actual C++ code. Okay. So the next question is, so it says here, as long as there are more employees to process, but how do we know if there's more employees to process? Well, there are different ways we could find that out. We could probably the most intuitive way would be to say, well, let's just ask the user if there's another employee or not. Okay, so I'm going to actually add that into our pseudocode here. I'm going to say, ask the user if there is an employee to process. And then as long as there are more employees to process, compute one employee's paycheck, and then ask the user if there is another employee to process. Okay? And so this is, you can see how this acts as sort of a loop, okay, because what's going to happen if the user says yes, there's another employee to process, is we're going to go back and compute. We go back to this line right here and compute another employee's paycheck, right? So most of this actually you already know how to write in C++. So I'm going to go ahead and do as much of this as I can given what we already know about C++. Okay? Actually, let me first get it set up. Okay. Ask the user if there's an employee to process. What's that going to look like? And I'm going to say, tell them what to answer. Answer, okay, how about response? Same thing pretty much, right? Okay, so we can do that. And then basically, this same two lines are going to go down here. Except that should be indented one more. we did this. Okay, so that's getting closer. We're replacing our pseudocode with real C++. This line right here is what? That's the program we wrote last time, right? So I'm going to go back to that program, and basically I'm going to copy the whole thing, and I will worry about the variable declarations in a minute, okay? So I'm not going to copy that part. And I'm going to put that right here. I bet the indentation is going to be a mess, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah. Okay, so that should be there. This should all be indented a little more. One more step. Okay, so let me just take a minute and check out where we are here, because I know there's a lot of code up here now. So just to make sure you get what's going on. So we're asking if there's an employee to process. This is our one line that we still have to replace with real C++. That's still pseudocode, right? But what we want to say is, as long as there are more employees to process, and then this code here actually processes one employee, and then at the end I'm going to ask if there's another employee to process. Any questions about that? Anyone need to just sit and stare at it a little longer? Okay, so what's left is for me to tell you how you say this in C++, right? And the way you say that in C++ is with the word while. While, just like with an if, we're gonna have a condition in parentheses. While response, I'm gonna be a little different here. I'm gonna say while response is not equal to n. I could just as easily have said while response is equal to y, right? And at this point in our programming careers, I'm not going to ask you to be concerned about if they enter something other than y or n. Okay, let's just not worry about that. Okay, that's it. Get rid of that pseudocode. And then I need a closed curly brace to close this open curly brace. So that goes right here. Now, I'm going to digress just for a second. Okay, when you look down here, if that's my program and I'm telling you that I'm done, you should be able to tell that there's something wrong. Why? Because there's not a well, that's absolutely correct. Okay, but the answer was because there's not a closed curly brace lined up with the while loop. That's absolutely correct. But even more to the point, just looking at those two lines, I can tell there's something wrong. Because this line right here is indented 2 levels, and there's no closed curly brace to close one of the levels. There's always going to be, at least if you use the technique that I use for indentation and open and close curly braces, there's always going to be a closed curly brace to end each level of indentation. So I can all I have to look at is the very bottom, and I know that there's something wrong with my code here. I need to go fix it. So the problem is there's missing a closed curly brace. And are we done? What's missing? System pause. Okay. I never remember the system pause because the only time I ever use it is when I'm standing up here. This part right here. Got that. Okay, I haven't declared response. As a matter of fact, I haven't declared anything, right? So response is a car. I'm going to stick with ints for now to keep things simple. Hold on just a sec. Let me int payroll. rate. I think that's it, right? Well, a car variable holds a character, and an int variable holds an integer. I know that probably didn't help very much because I kind of stated the obvious, right? But go ahead. It'll stay running. It'll stay open until you say no, and then it'll close and go away. Yeah, you'd still get to see everything except for the final thing. Yeah. Question. Yes. Right. Okay, so that's a good point. I haven't been very formal about this yet, so let me just explain exactly what's going to happen here. Okay. What happens is when I get to this point in my program, I evaluate that expression. If that expression is false, then I skip everything inside and I just go on. So in this case, I would be going on to the system pause, right? If that condition is true, then I execute the statements inside the while loop, and then when I hit the bottom, I go back up to the top and check the condition again. What that means is that here's something that students often get confused about. What happens if somewhere in the middle of my loop I say response gets n? Does that mean that as soon as that statement gets executed, the while loop is done? No, okay, because the condition isn't constantly getting checked. The condition only gets checked after I finish the while loop and go back up to the top. Does that make sense? All right, so you just have to be careful to always remember that things are done in sequence here. All right. Any questions about that? Let me just go back here for a second and use this as kind of a note-taking place. Note. So the general form of a while loop, it would be while, and here goes a condition, which we studied last time, right? We talked about what could go there, how to make a logical expression. So any logical expression that works in an if statement. Same exact thing here. Here you have some statements, and then you're done. Just like with an if statement, if you've only got one statement in your while loop, you can leave off the open and close curly brace if you want. Okay? It's not going to be as common as it is with if statements. Usually there's more than one statement in a while, but not always. Okay, let me see what's next here. So I am, for purposes of doing the assignment that I'm going to give you on this, I have a name for this kind of loop we just did. Okay, actually, you know what? Before I do anything else, let me actually execute this, okay? We'll actually see if it actually works. Always risky. Is there an employee to process? Yes. Hours worked 20. Rate of pay 10. $200. Is there an employee to process? How about if I say no? What's going to happen? It's going to run again, right? 30, 20, that's 600. Is there an employee to process? X. It's going to run again, right? 20, 30. Whoa. What just happened? Whoa. Whoa. Okay. Is it down here somewhere? What do I have? Someone just said I have to close out something. It's not, right, but
Maybe the compiler didn't register it closing because
This one? That's the broadcasting thing. Program reset, where does it say that? Oh, that's probably it, huh? There we go. Thank you. All right. I've been doing this for a long time, and I have never seen that happen before. What just happened? There's always a first. Let's try that again. I want to know if it's going to happen again. I have no idea why that happened. So, yes. Is there a play process? Yes. 10, 20, that's 200. X. 30, 10, that's fine. Lowercase n. 25, 10. That's the same place it happened last time. It's a lowercase. No, it wasn't. All right. So if you're watching the recording of this, you're probably really annoyed right now. Why don't I just... While response not equal to n. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to pretend that it worked. Let me just do it one time. And my guess at this point is that it's always going to crash on the third time. But that's bizarre. I have no idea why we do that. Let's just say yes. Whoops. Yes. 20, 10, and then let's say no. There, done. So it works, right? All right, so we should move on. We could probably figure out why it's doing that, but it might take us half an hour, and I don't want to spend half an hour trying to figure that out. Okay. Yeah, right. Okay, so I was about to say that for the purposes of the assignment 4, I call this thing I just did a question type loop. So basically, what I'm doing here is I've at least when you're just getting started with loops, I'm going to try to help you out by giving you like patterns you can follow. Okay, because loops are kind of hard when you're first getting started with loops. It's hard to create them from scratch for a lot of people. So I'm going to give you some patterns to follow. And to be honest, in the real world, programmers kind of do that anyway. They may not realize they're doing it, but they've done enough loops in their life already that when they create a loop, they're probably thinking of how they've done it another time. So anyway, it's a good place to start. So a question type loop is always going to have cout, is there a something, cn response, and then while response is not equal to no, or it could be while response is equal to y, body of the loop, okay, which should process one thing, whatever it is that we're processing, right? And then cout is there another cn response. Okay? So one of the problems on assignment 4 is going to be, actually take a program that you've already written and turn it into a question type loop.
Why is there a dot, 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 dot?
Because I'm saying you fill that in. Is there a thing, whatever it is that you're processing? Question. No. What's the last part of this? Oh, the taxes one, right? The phone call, yeah, you shouldn't need any loops in that. Okay, there's nothing in that, and so the question was, should we use this in the program about finding the cost of a phone call? And the answer is no, because there's nothing in there that gets repeated over and over again, right? That's just basically straight through. There's an if statements in there, but there's nothing being repeated. Okay. All right. I'm gonna do another kind of loop, and basically it's the same idea, but instead of asking the user yes or no, is there another employee or whatever, I'm just going to tell the user, I'm going to ask the user for how many hours the employee worked, and if the user answers with a negative number, that's going to be the signal that he or she is done with the program and wants to quit. Does that make sense? So, for example, a run of our program might look something like this. Enter hours worked. The user, let's say the user enters 10. Enter the rate of pay. Let's say the user enters 20. The amount of the paycheck is $200. Enter hours worked. Let's say the 50. Enter the rate of pay. Let's say the user enters 20 again. So in that case, the amount of the paycheck is $1,100. Enter the hours worked. And the user enters -1. And then that's it. The program ends. Yeah. So actually, and you know what? I've kind of changed how I do this a little bit since in the last few years. So I would, instead of saying negative number, well, I guess I could leave that there. But really what I want is I'm going to just say any negative number is going to cause the program to quit. Even though in the prompt I'm saying enter -1. If they enter -7, that's also going to cause the program to stop. Okay? So let's go see if we can write this thing. And maybe it even won't crash this time. So here's just a first shot at it. We're no longer going to need a response. So by the way, let me back up just a little bit. If I'm looking at this, does this seem like a better way to do it than the other way, or a worse way to do it? Better because, right, the user doesn't have to keep entering Y every time they want to enter the next employee. Okay, if there's 200 employees, they just enter the 200 employees, and then they only enter one extra thing at the end, which is the negative number to quit. So we're going to get rid of this. We don't need that anymore. Then I'm going to say while hours is not equal to -1. Then we do our calculation, print out the result, and we're done. Okay, so let's look at this. I wish I could fit the whole thing on here at once. I almost can. That's basically it. Let me just go down one size here. Can you still see that? And now you can see the whole while loop, okay? What do you think? Yes, thank you. Because I said I wanted any negative number to make it quit. So I'm going to say hours less than 0. Okay? Should we try this? Let's execute it and see what happens. Oh, thank you. Boy. While hours is greater than or equal to 0. Okay? That is how you write greater than or equal to, yeah. Same thing except with the less than instead of a greater than. Yeah. Okay, am I all ready to execute this? I think so. Let's give it a try. So let's say inner hours worked 20. Oh, I'm running the wrong one, huh? Inter hours worked. Oh, I forgot to do the -1. Okay, never mind. -1 to quit. There, that's better. So I'm going to enter 20. Rate of pay 10. That's $200. If I say I worked 50 hours, got $20 an hour, that's $1,100. And now if I quit, I enter -1. Is that what I wanted? What should happen if I enter -1? That should be it, right? Program should be done. So I don't know what to do now. I'll just enter -1 again, see what happens, and it'll say, well, the amount of the paycheck is $1. Okay, so not what we wanted, right? So let's take another look at what we've got here. Well, okay, so here are some good ideas. Let's talk about, first of all, why it's doing what it's doing, okay? Actually, that's a fundamental rule of debugging, okay? Don't try to fix the problem first before you understand what the problem is. That make sense? Otherwise, you end up going around in circles and trying things that make things worse, and you end up with a mess. Make sure you understand the problem first, and then fix it. Yeah. Okay. Question? Well, if hours is less than 0, that means, okay, so let's think about how C++ executes this, a while loop, right? If this condition is false, what happens? It skips the body of the while loop and continues on after the while loop. So it should just go straight to the system pause, and that's what we want, right? Okay, so let's talk about what's happening here. Well, right there I've got my prompt and my input statement for when I enter. I could possibly enter the -1, right? But obviously, if you look at just those 2 lines of code and then what comes next, entering -1 for the hours at that point is not going to make the program stop, right? Okay, so here's, so let me just kind of put up a little red flag and say the next 10 or 15 minutes is one of those times where I think that I'm saying stuff that I think is really, really important, okay? So the first observation I want to make about this is just to reiterate that the loop doesn't immediately stop executing if the condition becomes false somewhere in the middle of the loop. Everyone's clear on that? We already kind of talked about that. So the condition becomes true right here in the middle of the loop. That doesn't mean everything stops immediately. The loop finishes up and goes back up to the top, and then it stops. And that's not the behavior we're looking for in this case. So a result of this observation is that the CN statement, where the user might enter the terminating character, the character that tells us we want to stop, Okay, so the CN statement where the user might enter the special value, where should that go in your program? Where should that occur? Okay, so I heard someone say before the while loop. I heard someone say at the end of the while loop. There's actually one answer that is, I mean, those are both correct. It should happen, always happen right. So what should happen? What should always happen right after that CN statement? The condition should get checked, right? So if, in other words, if the user enters -1, we don't want anything else to happen before the condition gets checked. Okay? Now it actually turns out that there's two places where we could put that, where we could put the CN statement that would make that rule work. Well, how can I say? That would meet that criteria. That's what I'm trying to say. Two places we could put the CN statement that would meet that criteria of putting it right before the condition gets checked. Anybody want to tell me both of those places? Okay. Right before the while and right at the bottom of the loop. Okay? So that's right. That's where we're going to put it. I want to make one other observation, though. Students often say, that's kind of weird. Why do we have it inside the loop and outside the loop both? Why is it repeated? Okay? So I want to, go ahead. I want to try to motivate that a little bit, okay? Let's go back and look at our, I lost the output, didn't I? Well, let's look at this sample output that I typed, okay? How many times, how many employees am I processing in this example? Well, I mean, in this particular example right here, how many got processed? How many employees? Only 2 got processed, right? Does everyone agree with me on that? Because I only gave 2 paycheck amounts, right? Okay, so 2 employees got processed. How many times did I ask how many hours worked? 3. Okay, if there were 200 employees to get processed, how many times would I ask the question about how many hours were worked? 201, right? So there's always going to be one more of those than everything else. So it kind of makes sense that you'd have it in the loop so that it happens each time an employee gets processed, and then also again once outside of the loop. Does that make sense? Okay. This is also, I think in the text, what we're about to do, she calls it priming the loop. Okay. Getting some input before you test the condition the first time. Question? Well, that's not going to solve the problem of after I enter -1 for hours, I'm still going to get the rest of this output. Okay. Right. But then so that's a problem. Okay, so I understand what you're saying. So the comment is, couldn't I, you know what, I think what I do want to talk about that, but first I want to, well, no, let's go there. Let's go with it for a second. So the comment was, and I'm suggesting that I take this statement and put it here. What's up with the red line? Okay, and then I'm suggesting that we also put it here. All right, so the suggestion was, instead of asking the question here, couldn't we just say hours and then set it equal to 392, so that we make sure that it enters the while loop the first time, then we wouldn't have to ask that question, right? Okay. So if I run the program right now, is that going to work out okay? Okay, so right now if I run it, I'm not asking for the hours worked the first time, right? So that means I'd have to put, so are you suggesting that I put this back at the top? Okay. So, but if I do that, I've still got the same problem where if they enter -1, the next thing that happens is I see out enter the rate of pay. I still have that problem. Now, you can do it this way, and there is a solution. How could I do it this way but fix the problem? Go ahead. Yeah, I would just have to do an if here. I would have to surround everything else in this while loop with an if. Don't write this down if you're taking notes. If hours is greater than or equal to 0, and then do all of this stuff, indent that, like that. I guess I'll just go ahead and actually do it. Indent. Okay, I'm throwing a lot of code at you now, and I'm guessing that probably some of you aren't tracking with me. That's okay. You can go back and watch the recording, right? But actually, I now have a program that I think this will work. Okay? Which way do you like it better? So let me this way. Let me say a couple things I don't like about this way, okay? Number one, I think that it makes a lot of sense to have it outside the loop and inside the loop because of what I said before, right? It's always happening one more time than the employees are getting processed. So it makes sense to have it one extra time outside the loop. By putting it inside the loop and doing this if statement, we're kind of doing the same thing, but in a less straightforward way, I think. Anyway. I think it's nicer if we can avoid having the if statement nested inside the while loop. Okay? And I also think that it's always a little, I think it's bad practice to initialize a variable to an arbitrary value in general, okay? Why am I choosing 392? Because it's positive, right? But it's really, I'm just picking it out of the air. Why 392, right? So that's I mean, maybe this is splitting hairs, okay? But I would say I would never do that when I was writing programs, because someone's going to look at this and say, 392, why did he put 392? What's that mean? Okay. So anyway, those are my 3 arguments for doing it the way that I'm going to suggest instead of putting an if statement inside. And I'm going to go back and show you that again because I know it probably got lost on a lot of you. Question?
Also, you really would be better if someone ran this program and then they decided that they didn't have it in the process. They wouldn't be able to quit right away.
Oh, right. Okay, good point. The way it is right now. Oh no, that's not true actually. The way it is right now, if the user doesn't have anything to process. Right. With the if statement. Without the if statement, it's a non-starter, right? Without the if statement, it just doesn't work. So it will work with the if statement there, and with the variable initialized to an arbitrary non-negative value. Okay. And if you do it this way, it's not like I'm going to take points off. I'm working hard to just try to get you to think about doing things the best possible way you can. And sometimes you may disagree with me about what's the best possible way to do things. And after you get out of this class, you're free to do whatever you want. Okay. So I'm going to go back and just make sure everyone really understands the solution that I am suggesting. Now it's indented too far, huh? I have to take these two statements and repeat them at the bottom. The other thing I'll say is that this technique of priming the loop and having that, whatever that is that's happening, happen one time outside the loop and one time inside the loop in this situation is something that's going to come up a few more times while we're talking about programming, and so I think it's a good time to get started just using that technique. All right, do I have this right now? I've moved stuff around so many times, I'm not sure, but I think so. Oh, I don't need that anymore. Okay. So now some of you are probably looking at that and saying, okay, that's great, but now everything's in the wrong order, right? How does this work when the last thing in the while loop is actually supposed to be the first thing that happens? Okay, everything just seems kind of weird. So I guess just to make sure we're clear on it, here's how you should think about it. The first time this happens, it starts here and goes down through here, right? Whoa. Ay-ya. Try that again. First time it happens, it starts here and goes down through there. That make sense? Enter hours worked, enter pay rate, print out the result. The second time it happens, it starts here and goes back up here and goes down to here. And that's the second time it happens. Okay? Yeah, question? No. So okay. So you're asking if I'm down here and I enter -1, it will go up to the while loop condition. The condition is false, so it just stops. It goes and continues on with the next statement after the while loop, which is in our case is that system pause there. Okay. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say. Did I put this back? Yeah. There's actually a name for this kind of problem. Okay? Let me ask a question. If you have, not sure if I can, let's say this is, I'm trying to think of how to draw a picture here. Let's say we have a fence. And the fence is, whoa. 4 yeah, that's not going to work. Let me just play for a second here. Okay, you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit here, but I'm going to say that this is a fence, and these little things going up, the fence is going up and down, right? And so how many fence posts do I have in that picture? So yeah, that's why I asked. I wanted to see if you would be able to see it. And apparently not. So these bars here are the fence posts. And then these bars going up and down are the things going between the fence posts. So the fence is going up and down. So how many fence posts are there? 4. And how many, what do you call what goes between them? Crossbars. How many crossbars are there? 3, okay? So when you build a fence, there's always going to be fence post, crossbar, fence post, crossbar, fence post, crossbar, and then when you're done with that while loop, you've got one more fence post at the end to finish it up, right? Or the way we're doing it is actually the opposite, right? We start with a fence post, and then our loop says crossbar, fence post, crossbar, fence post, crossbar, fence post, right? So that, do you get the analogy there between the fence post problem and what we're talking about in this situation right here? The inter hours worked. This line right here is the fence post, right? And it comes at the beginning and at the end. Okay, so it's called the fence post problem. Not very many people call it that. I call it that. Okay, someone has heard that before. All right. Questions at 11:50, right? I'm not messing up. Ah, very funny. Okay, so I still have some more time. I want to talk about another kind of loop. By the way, so what I've talked about so far is I've talked about a question type loop and a special value type loop. I just want to be clear that those are not C++ concepts. Those are just kind of things I made up to call these different loop patterns. And you probably won't find those terms anyplace else that I know of. And so I'm going to talk about one more kind of loop, and that's a counter-controlled loop. Okay? And the difference between the loops we've talked about so far and a counter-controlled loop, and this is actually more common. In the textbook, I think she'll talk about this, and she calls it a count-controlled loop, I think. But this is a loop where we know before we enter the loop how many times it's going to get executed. Okay? So backing up a little bit, in the examples we've been doing, could we have calculated before we started the loop how many times the loop was going to get executed? Well, we could ask the user how many times, but we didn't set it up that way, right? So the behavior that we wanted was we wanted the loop to keep going until the user entered a certain value, right? So assuming that's the behavior we wanted, could we have calculated before the loop started how many times it was going to get executed? No, right? So those would not be, we would not be able to use a counter-controlled loop for those situations. What I'm going to do is an example where I write a program and it just prints my name on the screen 10 times. Okay, so in that case, before the loop starts, we know how many times it's going to execute, right? So it's a counter-control loop. So let's try that. I guess I shouldn't have erased all of the, hold on. Oh, Chinese C++. Okay, so there's a program that prints my name on the screen 10 times, right? Question. I could, but I'm just for the sake of illustration now, I'm just going to print my own name. The question was, shouldn't I make it as an inputted name? And yeah, sure, that would be a more generally useful program, I suppose. Not that this program isn't generally useful, but so yeah, I'm just, for the sake of example, I'm just giving it very simple, just print my name on the screen 10 times. Anybody have any objection to writing it this way? Question? Or answer, whatever. Sorry? What if I wanted it 100 times? It'd be pretty hard to use this technique to write it out 100 times, right? Any other objections? Sorry? Yeah, we can do that. Okay. Yeah, we could do that. So the question was, well, the question was, can we do something? And the answer is yes, and I'm about to show you how. Another question or comment? Okay, good. So remember, okay, back up a second here. I'm on the subject of why this is bad. Okay, and one reason is that it would be bad if we wanted to do it like 1,000 times or something, right? Another reason is that if we wanted to change it to some other name, that would take a lot of work. right? It might not be, it might be able to fudge it a little bit if we've got search and replace, but that's always dangerous too, right? Because then there's a Dave that comes up some other time when you didn't want to replace it. Anything else that you think is bad about this? There's one thing I'm looking, I mean, those are both important things, but there's something else that I am really excited about you figuring out. Yes? Okay. So the answer is it's tedious and long and a pain in the butt to do, and there's probably some other way to do it, so you only have to write that once. Wait, over here. Okay. If you want to see how many times it's going to print out, you have to count, and what's the probability that you might actually count wrong? So does this actually print the word Dave 10 times? No, it actually, I think, unless I counted wrong, I think it's actually 11. So the third objection that I was looking for was it's going to be hard, it's going to be easy to make mistakes, hard to debug. Okay? So all of that to say, you probably don't want something like this. You probably want a more general solution. And we're going to do that using a counter-controlled loop. Let me just start with, let me get rid of that for now. Whoa. Whoa, what did I just do? All sorts of interesting things are happening today. So it's going to be this, while something right? So all we have to do is figure out what's going to go inside those parentheses. And just to kind of, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start refining this a little bit. I'm going to replace it with English, and then I'm going to switch that to C++ somehow. So what I really want to say here is while number of times the loop has executed is less than 10. Does that make sense? Or should that be less than or equal to 10? I want it to go 10 times. Less than 10? Okay, so this is great. Okay, this is exactly, I mean, we're not even doing C++ yet. We're just talking about it in English, and there's already a problem we need to solve. Okay? Should that be less than, or should it be less than or equal to? Okay, so one person says the first time is the 0 time, so you don't need a 10th time, right? So the way I would do this is, if the number of times the loop has executed is 9, do you want to execute it again? Yes. Everyone okay with that? All right. If the number of times the loop has executed is 10, the loop has already been executed 10 times. Do you want to execute it again? No, it's already been executed 10 times. So that's why it should be less than and not less than or equal to. If you say less than or equal to, that means that if the number of times the loop has executed is 10, you're still going to do it one more time, which will make it 11. Questions about that? Okay, so how are we going to, there's no magic like thing in C++ that keeps track of how many times a loop has been executed. We're going to have to do that ourselves manually. Question or comment or no? Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna give it away here. Basically, we're just going to keep introduce a variable that we're going to use to keep track of how many times the loop has been executed. Okay? So I'm going to say count. Okay? I need to start count off at something. What should I start it off at? Because count represents, and this would be a good place for a comment. Whoa. Number of times the loop has executed, right? I'm being very careful about this. I'm defining what my variable represents very carefully. And that's a very good programming practice, right? You don't want to just slop some variables in there and not really know what exactly it is they're representing. So, before I start my while loop, the number of times the loop has executed is 0. So that's why I'm initializing count to 0. All right, what else needs to happen in here? Number of times the loop has executed, that is now being represented by a variable count, so I can just put count there. Okay. What else?
At the end of your while loop, you have to say that count equals count plus 1.
Okay. Question. Yes. In C++, there's a shortcut for count gets count plus 1, and that is count plus plus. Question. Eventually. Not yet. Because I'm still not done talking about this. So what I want to say about this is that I would also use this as a pattern. And, counter control loops are actually kind of hard to get exactly right if you start from scratch every time. We did a lot of talking about, well, should it be less than, it should be less than or equal to, should it be 10? You can be off by 1 very easily, okay? So most programmers, whether they realize it or not, when they do a counter control loop, they just know they have a pattern and they just throw it down there because they've done it so many times, okay? So my suggestion is this. And there's different ways to do this, right? This would also be correct. Just don't write for a second. I'm going to throw something up and then I'm going to erase it, okay? But this would also be correct if I said count gets 1 and count less than or equal to 10, right? That could be my pattern, okay? You don't have to be able to figure out whether I'm actually telling the truth or not. You can just trust me on this one, okay? That would be correct. But for a variety of reasons, I'm going to suggest that you just get in the habit of always starting count at 0, always using count less than however many times you want the loop to go, and then always putting count gets count plus 1, which is the same thing as count plus plus, at the bottom of your loop. So for a counter control loop, there's 3 parts to the pattern. Initialize to 0, compare with how many times you want to go through the loop using less than, increment at the bottom of the loop. Okay? Any questions about that? Let me just tell you that there's a couple of reasons why I do it this way and not other ways. So this is a well thought out thing. Okay, in C++, it turns out that there's a lot of things that start at 0, and so you might as well get in the habit now of counting from 0, because that's a C++ way of doing things. You're rarely going to count from 1 when you're programming in C++, unless there's an application that just requires you to start from 1. Sorry, I just saw that someone is asking what the student's comment was, and I have no idea because that was probably like 5 minutes ago. And then the other thing is that I'm suggesting that you always do the increment at the bottom of the loop, and that's because well, actually we're gonna find out on next Monday why that is. Okay, but there's a reason for that. Okay, let's do what everyone has been like pestering me to do, which is let's just ask the user for how many times he wants the name to be printed out. Okay, I know you've all been dying to see that. So let's just say, see how many times should I print the name? Seeing num times. Everyone okay so far? So what else needs to change in here? Replace the 10 with num times. That makes sense to everybody? I still have the same pattern here. I'm still initializing to 0. I'm still saying count less than how many times I want the loop to get executed, and I'm still incrementing at the bottom of the loop. Question? Oh yeah. Oh, you want? Okay, that's a good idea. Always remind me to do that because I like doing that and I forget often. Someone wanted me to repeat what the 3 steps are, and that's pretty important. So let me actually just write them, okay? And then I'll execute. So the 3 steps are initialize. And what I'm saying is initialize to 0. And then the second step is compare. And the way I'm suggesting we compare is we always compare less than number of times the loop should execute. And the third step is increment. And I'm saying at the bottom of the loop. Those are the 3 steps. That's the count plus plus, yes. The increment is the count plus plus. Okay. Yeah, actually, just quickly, for those of you online, someone pointed out something that really is important, and that is if you type something and you want me to see it, you can click on the raising your hand icon, and then it kind of flashes at me, and I'm more likely to see that you've asked me a question. Okay, so let's execute this. Yeah. Hey. Oh, thank you. Question? Yeah, you know, if you were writing this program, I would recommend that you put a comment next to that variable declaration. You'll notice that when I am developing programs in class, I don't do a lot of commenting because I don't want to take the time every time. But you know, if you were going to submit this as a homework assignment, there would be a big comment at the top, right? An initial file comment. Okay, execute, compile and run. Oh. How many times should I print the name? Let's go with 3 at first. Okay, so we got 3. And I could do it again. And I could say 13 this time, but we probably won't be able to count to see if there's really 13. Or we probably don't want to bother, but okay, someone's quick at counting. All right, everyone happy with that so far? Okay, I think we can do one more example. Let's write a program that writes out the numbers from 1 to n, where n is entered by the user. Okay? So let's kind of keep this and just kind of modify what we need to modify. So we're going to see out. The question should be, up to what number do you want to count? And I guess I'll call this, I could just leave it, but I'm going to call it max number, or max num. Does that make sense why I'm calling it max num? That's the biggest that the number is going to get to. Okay, so this is also going to be max num. So I'm going to say count gets 0, count less than max num, count plus plus at the bottom. So I've got my counter controlled loop set up, and basically that right there that you see there, that's the template for a counter controlled loop, right? Anytime you see, okay, I'm looking at this problem that Dave told me to do, and I see that I can figure out how many times the loop is going to execute. So it's going to be a counter controlled loop. So I'm just going to write this code in my program and start with that. Okay? The only thing that might change, would be that there might change to something else, but okay. So what do we want to do each time through the loop? See how count? Everyone okay with that? Okay, so if I enter 9, this is going to count from 1 to 9. 0 to 9. 0 to 8. What do you think? Okay, I have a second for 0 to 8. Well, let me ask you this. How many times is that loop going to get executed? 9 times, right? So could it be counting from 0 up through 9? No, because that would be 10 numbers. Okay. What's the first number that's going to get printed out here? 0. What's the last number that's going to get printed out here? If I enter 9, yeah. 8. Okay, so this isn't quite what we wanted, right? How can I fix that? Okay, so I heard 4 different answers, and they are all correct. There's a lot of different ways we could fix this, right? Let me just be stubborn for a second and say, how can I fix this without messing up the pattern that I've told you to follow? Okay, that messes up the pattern. Okay, so the comment was I could put the count plus plus at the top instead of at the bottom of the loop, right? Oh, both places. Then every time through the loop, I'm going to increment twice, right? And if I'm being stubborn and I want to stick to my pattern, I can't move count plus plus up to the top. What do you think? So, right, which I don't want it to, right? So, yeah, I wasn't actually clear about that, but when I say count up to 10, I mean start at 1. So 1 will be the first number and 10 will be the last number. Yeah. Yeah, that'll work. Okay? Let's try it. $17. Okay, so for those of you who are close enough to be able to read that, that's counting from 1 to 17. Any questions? Okay, so I'm not claiming necessarily that this is the best way to do it. Okay, there are going to be times when it's going to be, so inconvenient to stick to the pattern that you may want to just try something else. So, for example, in this case, I could have said just start count at 1 because that's the first number we want to print out, right? And then don't stop when I get to 10. Keep going one more time when I get to 10. So change that to equal. And this would also work just as well. Okay? And another way to fix it would be putting this at the top. Okay? That would also work. Okay? But those last two things I showed you are just not following the pattern that I told you that I suggested that you follow. Okay? All right, so next time we'll just do a couple more examples and we'll start talking about for loops and do while loops.